again. Uh, um, Welcome to the online class lecture of Professor S.K. Paul, University Department of English, BRA, Bihar University, Muzaffarpur. Dear students of PG, Semester 1, CC2, Unit 2. Good morning. Today I am going to deliver my lecture on King Lear. Uh, as in my last lecture, I have dealt with the Act 1, Act 1 and all its scenes I have discussed in a nutshell. Today, I would discuss Act 1 in details. Act 1 of King Lear. The play begins with two noble men, Gloucester and Kent, discussing the fact that King Lear is about to divide his kingdom. Their conversation quickly changes. However, when Kent asks Gloucester to introduce his son, Gloucester introduces Edmund, explaining that Edmund is a bastard being raised away from home, but that he nevertheless loves his son dearly. Lear, the ruler of Britain, enters his throne room and announces his plan to divide the kingdom among his three daughters. He intends to give up the responsibilities of government and spend his old age visiting his children. He commands his daughters to say which of them loves him the most, promising to give the greatest share to that daughter. Lear's scheming older daughters, Goneril and Regan, respond to his test with flattery, telling him in a wildly overblown terms that they love him more than anything else. But Cordelia, Lear's youngest and favorite daughter, refuses to speak. When pressed, she says that she cannot heave her heart into her mouth, that she loves him exactly as much as a daughter should love her father, and that her sisters wouldn't have husbands if they loved their father as much as they say. It is found in Act 1, Scene 1, lines 90 to 91. In response, Lear flies into a rage, disowns Cordelia, and divides her share of the kingdom between her two sisters. The Earl of Kent, a nobleman who has served Lear faithfully for many years, is the only courtier who disagrees with the king's actions. Kent tells Lear he is insane to reward the flattery of his older daughters and disown Cordelia, who loves him more than her sisters do. Lear turns his anger on Kent, banishing him from the kingdom and telling him that he must be gone within 6 days. The King of France and Duke of Burgundy are at Lear's court awaiting his decision as to which of them will marry Cordelia. Lear calls them in and tells them that Cordelia no longer has any title or land. Burgundy withdraws his offer of marriage, but France is impressed by Cordelia's honesty and decides to make her his queen. Lear sends her away without his blessing. Goneril and Regan scheme together in secrecy, although they recognize uh, that they that they now have complete power over the kingdom. They agree that they must act to reduce their father's remaining authority. Now, summary of Act 1, Scene 2. Thou, nature, art my goodness, to thy law my services are bound. Now, gods, stand up for bastards. Edmund enters and delivers a soliloquy. expressing his dissatisfaction with society's attitude towards bastards. He bitterly resents his legitimate half brother Edgar, who stands to inherit their father's estate. He resolves to do away with Edgar and seize the privileges that society has denied him. Edmund begins his campaign to discredit Edgar by forging a letter in which Edgar appears to plot the death of their father. Gloucester, Edmund makes a show of hiding this letter from his father, and so naturally Gloucester ends up thinking that his legitimate son Edgar has been scheming to kill him in order to hasten his inheritance of Gloucester's wealth and lands. Later, when Later, when Edmund talks to Edgar, he tells him that Gloucester is very angry with him and that Edgar should avoid him as much as possible and carry a sword with him at all times. Thus, Edmund carefully arranges circumstances so that Gloucester will be certain that Edgar is trying to murder him. Analysis of Act 1 and scenes 1 to 2. The love test at the beginning of Act 1 of King Lear in scene 1 sets the tone for his extremely complicated play, which is full of emotional subtlety, conspiracy, and double talk, and which swings between confusing extremes of love and anger. Lear's demand that his daughters express how much they love him in puzzling and hints at the insecurity and fear of an old man who needs to be reassured of his own importance, of course, rather than being a true assessment of his daughter's love for him. The test seems to invite or even to demand flattery. Goneril's and Regan's professions of love are obviously nothing but flattery. Goneril cannot even put her alleged love into words, a love that makes speech unable, beyond all manner of so much. I love you in Act 1, Scene 1, line 59. Regan follows her sister's lead by saying, I find she names my very deed of love only, she comes too short. In contrast to her sisters, whose professions are banal and insincere, Cordelia does not seem to know how to flatter her father. An immediate reflection of her honesty and true devotion to him. Love and be silent, she says to herself in Act 1, Scene 1, line 60. Cordelia's authentic love and Lear's blindness to its existence triggered the tragic events that follow. The shift of the play's focus to Gloucester and Edmund in Act 1, Scene 2, suggests parallels between this subplot and Lear's familial difficulties. Both fathers mistake the unloving. Both fathers mistakes the unloving for the loving, banishing to the truth. Banishing to the truth becomes more literal as the play progresses in Lear's eventual madness and Gloucester's physical blinding. Moreover, Gloucester's willingness to believe the lies that Edmund tells him about Edgar seems to reflect a pre-existing fear that his children secretly want to destroy him and take his power. Ironically, this is what Edmund, of course, wants to do Gloucester. But Gloucester is blind to Edmund's treachery. Gloucester's inability to see the truth echoes the discussion between Goneril and Regan at the end of Act One, and his unconstant starts. Act One, Scene One, line 298 evokes images of senility and suggests that his daughters out to take control from him, just as Edmund is taking control from Gloucester. Edmund is significantly more complicated than the other major villains in the play. Regan and Goneril, he schemes against his father's life, but not just because he wants to inherit his wealth and land. Indeed, his principal motive seems to be desire for recognition and perhaps even the love denied him because of his bastard status. The first time we see Edmund, the first time we see Edmund at the beginning of Act 1, Scene 1. His own father is mocking him because he is illegitimate. Edmund's treachery can be seen as a rebellion against the social hierarchy that makes him worthless in the eyes of the world. He rejects the plague of custom that makes society disdain him and dedicates himself to nature. Act 1, Scene 2, line 1. That is a raw, unconstrained existence. He will not be the only character to invoke nature in the course of the play. The complicated relationships that obtain among the natural world, the gods above, and fate or justice pervade the entire play. Act 1, Scene 3. Lear is spending the first portion of his retirement at Goneril's castle. Goneril complains to her steward Oswald that Lear's knights are becoming riotous and that Lear himself is an obnoxious guest. Act 1, Scene 3, line 6. Seeking to provoke a confrontation, she orders her servants to behave rudely toward Lear and his attendants. Act 1, Scene 4. Disguised as a simple peasant, Kent appears in Goneril's castle, calling himself Caius. He puts himself in Lear's way, and after an exchange of words in which Caius emphasizes his plain spokenness and honesty, Lear accepts him into service. Lear's servants and knights notice that Goneril's servants no longer obey their commands. When Lear asks Oswald where Goneril is, Oswald rudely leaves the room without replying. Oswald. Oswald soon returns, but his disrespectful replies to Lear's questions induce Lear to strike him. Kent steps in to aid Lear and trips Oswald. The fool arrives, and in a series of puns and double entendres, tells Lear that he has made a great mistake in handing over his power to Goneril and Regan. After a long delay, Goneril herself arrives to speak with Lear. She tells him that his servants and knights have been so disorderly that he will have to send some of them away whether he likes it or not. Lear is shocked at General's treasonous betrayal. Nonetheless, Goneril remains adamant in her demand that Lear send away half of his 100 knights. And enraged Lear repents ever handing his power over to Goneril. He curses his daughter, calling on nature to make her childless. Surprised by his own tears, he calls for his horses. He declares that he will stay with Regan, whom he believes will be a true daughter and give him the respect that he deserves. When Lear has gone, Goneril argues with her husband, Albany, who is upset with the harsh way she has treated Lear. She says that he has written a letter to her sister Regan, who is likewise determined not to house Lear's 100 knights. And now, Act 1, Scene 5. Lear sends Kent to deliver a message to Gloucester. The fool needles Lear further about his bad decisions, foreseeing that Regan will treat Lear no better than Goneril did. Lear calls on heaven to keep him from going mad. Lear and his attendants leave for Regan's castle. Act 1, scene 3 to 5. In these scenes, the tragedy of the play begins to unfold. It is now becoming clear to everyone that Lear has made a mistake in handing over his power to Goneril and Regan. Lear's, Lear's major error is that in stepping down from the throne, he has also given up all of his formal authority to those who do not actually love him. He no longer has the power to command anyone to do anything, even to give him shelter or food. His daughters, each of whom is now a queen over half of Britain, wield especially authority over him. Goneril and as we soon discover, Regan enjoy being in power and conspire to destroy Lear's remaining influence. Their plan to fight, their plan to whittle down Lear's retinue from 100 knights to 50 may not seem mean devious, but they will soon purge his knights altogether. This gradual diminishment of Lear's attendance symbolizes the gradual elimination of his remaining power. Knights and servants are part of the pomp that surrounds a powerful king, and Lear rightly sees his loss of them as representative of his daughter's declining respect for his rank. Goneril, of course, says that the reason she demands this reduction is that the knights have been loud and destructive in her castle. They are, she claims, men so disordered, so debased and bold. Act 1, Scene 4, line 270. To be fair, it is difficult for us as readers to know how true this assertion is. Lear claims, my train are men of choice and rarest parts, that all particulars of duty know. Yet we have already seen Lear make imperious demands and lose his temper in a seemingly unjustified way. Act 1, Scene 4, lines 240 to 241. At this point in the play, the audience may still be unsure about whether or not to sympathize with Lear, especially given his capricious decision to banish Cordelia. Still, we know that Goneril has been talking in private about how to best control her aging father. Lear seems to begin to question his own identity when he realizes that Goneril plans to frustrate his desires. He asks, doth any here know me? This is not Lear. Who is that? Who is that? Who is that can tell me how I am? Line Act 1, Scene 4, lines 201 to 205. It is as if Goneril's insistence that Lear is now senile makes Lear himself wonder whether he is really himself anymore, or whether he has lost his mind. Driven to despair at the end of Act 1, Scene 5, he says, "Oh, let me not be mad, not mad, sweet heaven," a foreshadowing of his eventual eventual insanity. Act 1, Scene 5. In Act 1, Scene 4, we meet Lear's fools. In Act 1, Scene 4, we meet Lear's fool. Many of Shakespeare's plays feature a clown of some sort, and King Lear arguably has two such clowns, the fool himself and Edgar in his later disguise as Tom o' Bedlam. Many kings and queens during the Renaissance had court fools to amuse them. However, in addition to wearing a funny costume, singing, performing acrobatic tricks, and juggling, fools also made puns and rude jokes and offered their take on matters to their sovereigns. Lear's fool cleverly combines this sort of foolishness with a deeper wisdom, the license traditionally granted to official fools to say things to their superiors that anybody else would be punished for enables him to counsel Lear, even though he seems only to prattle nonsensically. Moreover, Lear seems to have a very close relationship with his fool. The fool calls Lear uncle and uncle, and Lear calls the fool boy. He is always speaking in riddles and songs, but in this sense, his meaning can be understood. He advises Lear to be wary of his daughters in telling Lear, I am better than thou art now. I am a fool. I am better than thou art now. I am a fool. Thou art nothing. He hints at the dangerous situation in which Lear has put himself. In Act 1, Scene 4, lines 168 to 69. He's, ost- uh, he's, ostensibly he's ostensibly silly singing. The hedge sparrow fed the cuckoo so long that it had it had it bit off by it young. Clearly warns the king that his daughters, each like a traitorous cuckoo, plan to turn against the father who raised them. In Act 1, Scene 4, lines 190 to 91. Gloucester and Kent, loyal to King Lear, objectively discuss his division of his kingdom as Lear is preparing to step down, and to which dukes, Cornwall and Albany. They believe it will equally fall. Kent is introduced to Gloucester's illegitimate son Edmund. Gloucester nonchalantly admits that the boy's breeding has been his charge ever since impregnating another woman soon after his legitimate son Edgar was born. Kent is pleased to meet Edmund. Gloucester mentions that Edmund has been 9 years in military service and will return shortly. Lear enters and sends Gloucester to find France and Burgundy, Cordelia's suitors. He then begins to discuss the partitioning of Britain he has devised to each of his three daughters and their husbands. Lear decides to ask each of his daughters to express how much they love him before he hands over their piece of the kingdom. As oldest, Goneril speaks first, expressing her love as well, love as all encompassing. Regan adds that she is enemy to other joys. Lear gives each their parcel, wishing them well. Cordelia, as the youngest and most liked daughter, is saved the choicest piece of land. However, she responds to her father's request by saying she has nothing to add. She loves only as much as her obligation entitles, and will save some of her love for a husband. Lear is enraged and hurt. After giving her a few chances, he strips Cordelia of any title or relation. Kent intercedes on her behalf, but he too is estranged by Lear. Kent cries that honesty will continue to be his guide in any kingdom. Cordelia's suitors enter. Lear apprises them of Cordelia's new state of non inheritance. Burgundy cannot accept her under the circumstances, but France finds her more appealing and takes her as his wife. Cordelia is not unhappy to leave her sisters and lives with France. Gondrel and Regan conspire to take rule away from Lear quickly as he is becoming bold and reasonable. Scene 2. The scene enters the scene centers on Edmund at first alone on a stage, crying out against his position as bastard to the material world. He is envious of Edgar, the legitimate son, and wishes to gain what he has by forging a treasonous letter concerning Gloucester from Edgar. Gloucester enters, amazed at the events which have occurred during the last scene. He wishes to know why Edmund is hiding a letter and demands to see it. He shrewdly acts as if he is embarrassed to show it to Gloucester and continually makes excuses for Edgar's apparent behavior. Gloucester reads the letter detailing Edgar's call to Edmund to take their father's land from him. Edmund asks that he does not make too quick too quick a judgment before they talk to Edgar, as perhaps he is simply testing Edmund. He suggests forming a meeting where Edmund can ask Edgar about his proposals while Gloucester listens in secret. Gloucester agrees, musing on the effects of nature and its predictions. He leaves directly before Edgar enters. Edmund brings up the astronomical predictions he had discussed with Gloucester and alerts Edgar and Edgar's and alerts Edgar that Gloucester is very upset with him, though he knows not why. Edmund offers to take Edgar back to his lodging until he can bring he and Gloucester together and advises him to go armed. Edgar leaves, and Edmund notes that he will soon take his due through wit. Scene 2. Sorry, scene 3. Scene 3 reintroduces Goneril. As she is outraged by the offenses she contends, Lear has been showing her since moving into her residence. He has struck Oswald for criticizing his fool, his knights are riotous, and so on. She claims Lear is out hunting. Goneril commands Oswald to allow her privacy from Lear and to treat Lear with weary negligence. She does not want, she does not want him to be happy, hoping that he will move to Reagan's, where she knows he will face the same contempt. She demands Oswald to treat his knights coldly as well. She lives to write again. Now, scene 4. Kent enters, disguised and hoping to serve in secret as a servant to Lear so that he can help him, though he is condemned. Lear accepts to try him as a servant. Oswald comes in quickly before before um, e- existing again curtly. The knights The knight fears Lear is being treated wrongly. Lear had blamed himself for any coldness, but agrees to look into a problem in Goneril's household. Lear's fool has hidden himself since Cordelia's departure, so Lear sends the knight for him. Oswald re-enters, showing Lear the negligence Goneril had suggested. Lear and Kent strike him, and endearing Kent in Lear's eyes. Oswald exits as Fool enters. Fool persistently mocks and ridicules Lear for his actions in Scene 1. His mistreatment of Cordelia, trust in Goneril and Regan, and giving up of his authority. He calls Lear himself a fool, noting he has given away all other titles. The fool notes that he is punished by Lear if he lies, punished by the household if he speaks the truth, and often punished for staying silent. Goneril harps on the trouble Lear and his retinue are causing, such as the insolence of Fool and the riotous behavior of the knights. She states that he is not showing her the proper respect and consideration by allowing these actions to occur. Lear is incredulous. Goneril continues by adding that as Lear's large a frenzied train cannot be controlled. She will have to ask him to keep fewer than his 100 knights. Outraged, Lear admits that Goneril's offense makes Cordelia's seem small. As Albany enters, Lear curses Goneril with infertility or, in its state, a thankless child. He then finds that his train has already been harped and again rages against the incredible impudence Goneril has shown him. He angrily leaps for Regan's residence. Albany does not approve of Goneril's behavior and is criticized by her for being weak. Goneril sends Oswald with a letter to her sister detailing her fear that Lear is dangerous and should be curtailed as soon as possible. Scene 5. Impatient, Lear sends the disguised Kent to bring letters to Gloucester. The fool wisely warns that Regan will likely act no better than her sister had. He criticizes Lear for giving away his own home and place, using examples such as a snail carrying his shell. Lear recognizes he will have to subdue his fatherly instincts toward Regan as well. Fool points out that Lear has forgotten old before he is wise. Lear cries out, praying that he will not go mad. The kingdom's division, as alluded to by Kent and Gloucester, is strange in that it is not mentioned in the context of Lear's daughters. The seeming arbitrariness this shades on Lear's enactment of the love test provides a contrast through which to view the misplaced importance Lear is placing on words, appearance, and position. We will soon learn that Kent and Gloucester are two of the only men who could provide Lear with sound, sincere advice, thus endowing their original take of the situation with a greater significance. They have no problem with Lear's decision to divide the kingdom as he is old and is attempting to escape greater conflict after after his death. Thus, Kent's revolt against Lear's actions arises not from Lear's initial undertaking, but from his reaction, but from his but from reaction to Cordelia. Notice too that he does not protest when Lear asks for an estimation, competition for love from him, his daughters, or when Goneril and Regan does not notice the sincerity of Cordelia's words and then moves to strip her of his love and titles. This is not only foolish but hurtful and unjust. The love taste was foolish, but on the surface harmed little. Yet Gondril and Regan lightly knew that their sister would not compete with them if they were extravagant enough in their claims of love toward their father. Of course, they did not love him with their all, but in Lear's old and insecure state, they knew he would fall for their insincerity, and Cordelia could refrain from competing on such a hypocritical level. Notice the sonorous quality of the sisters' names. The two oldest have a very harsh, coarse, and sounding names lacking in femininity or beauty. Cordelia's name is much more melodic and feminine. This is the first constructed quality which sets her apart from her sisters. Also, pay attention to the inflated verse Goneril and Regan use when addressing their father, as opposed to the to the much harsher prose they regress to upon his exit in scene 1. Their true vices are symbolized by the harsh prose we receive from them when alone, just as their names reverberate with crudeness. Cordelia, however, often speaks in rhyming couplets, a much more elevated form than her sisters, which allows her to be further set apart from their hypocrisy. We also note that Kent will at times, especially in his defense of Cordelia slip into rhyming couplets. Shakespeare stresses the elevation of language to symbolize the true nature of characters, highlighting Kent and Cordelia as honorable characters. Cordelia frequently, however, understates her sincerity and true affections. She is aware that her sisters speak superficially, employing terms of value and worth in expressing their love, and refuses to echo their hypocrisy, thus responding more coldly than she likely otherwise would. Her asides to the audience give an unadulterated view into her thoughts, similar to the two vices of Goneril and Regan we meet at the end of scene 1. Her response, nothing echoes these asides instead of disguising them, and illustrates to the reader how Cordelia, as a character, is stripped of pretense and artifice. The idea is echoed literally and symbolically in Lear's comment of Scene 4. Nothing can be made out of nothing. Act 1, Scene 4, line 126. In the very same scene that Lear admits he has overacted toward Cordelia, though only at this point acknowledging that Goneril's offense is greater. He perceives that truth and sincerity cannot be represented by pretense. Regardless of how well Lear has been fooled by the artifice of his older daughters, he allows the fool to counteract his elderly need for praise and love. Not surprisingly, in Shakespeare's plays, the fool is often the least foolish, directing the lead characters to their miscues in slightly comedic or um, condescending ways. His singing to Lear illustrates further the use of language and the presentation of language which Shakespeare employs to distinguish between different characters' qualities or the different intentions of single characters. King Lear is parable, encrusted with symbolic figures and actions toward a predicted and fabled end. Suspension of disbelief must be enacted on a level as many readers are moved to question Lear's decision making and early blindness toward truth and goodness. As one critic raises, how would Kent and France recognize Cordelia's sincerity and inner beauty when her own father cannot? On a realistic level, Lear has started to regress toward dementia and old age. We know by Kent and Gloucester's loyalty toward him that he had once been more reasonable. On the figurative and more appropriate level, appropriate level, Lear is a Lear is an allegorical figure in a parable and must move blindly toward this character demise in order to be resurrected to honesty and the goodness a life fallen and his fallen daughter represents in the end. He committed a fatal and selfish human error which cannot be mended without the journey and transformation he must undergo. The story of King Lear had been kicked around in old British literature and lore, but Shakespeare appears to be the first to allow it to end as tragically as the story's course first suggests. With this in mind, Lear's life is headed in an almost inevitable downward spiral. The plot centers more around how Lear will handle this spiral and his conquering of artifice and insincerity. Blindness is one of the most frequently employed metaphors in King Lear. Blindness will become a physical problem for Gloucester later in the play, but its metaphoric weight is used to foreshadow and heighten this development. Lear is blind to the blatant hypocrisy of his two oldest daughters from the first moment we meet him. However, unlike the implication that he has once a more noble man, since he has the support of seemingly noble sub-characters Kent and Gloucester, we are not given the impression that he ever knew well enough to previously suspect Goneril or Reagan of ingratitude or dishonesty. They have obviously shown their true colors at some point before, though since Cordelia responds in such a manner to alert us that she will not sink as how in hypocrisy as her sisters will. For instance, she comments, a still soliciting eye, and such a tongue that I am glad. Yes, yes, yes. What's the problem? Now, is it okay now? Hello? Okay, okay, just wait. Okay, just please wait. Now it's okay. Hello? 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 Is it okay now? Okay. Breaking? Why it is breaking? Okay, okay, I see. But here, just I am to finish now. Just manage. It's the last leg of my lecture. Okay. Now, can you hear me? Hello? 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 Okay. Lear, although Lear has obviously favored Cordelia. He has been blind to the inherent ingratitude of his two other daughters and is foolish enough to trust them with his livelihood after more foolishly disinheriting Cordelia and exiling Kent. A good example of this is presented in the very first scene. Lear cries to Kent, "Out of my sight!" To which to which Kent retorts, see better, Lear, and let me still remain the true blank of thine eye." He wishes to be allowed. He wishes to be allowed to remain the one who could center Lear's focus. Yet, even when Kent re enters the play disguised, he cannot alter the course that Lear has begun. Lear becomes increasingly blind to the truth around him. Sight or the lack of it is referenced a few scenes later more explicitly when Lear himself notices that he has lost sight of what is important, so to say. He cries, does any here know me? This is not Lear. Does Lear walk thus? Speak thus? Where are his eyes? Act 1, Scene 4, lines 216 to 17. Kent cannot become his eyes as the tragic plot and subplot move toward blindness and disillusion. The subplot of child betraying sibling and father eerily and intentionally mirrors the plot of children betraying father and father betraying child. Shakespeare's method of juxtaposing the two plots through the interspersing of a scene relating to the plot with a scene centered around Edmund's sinister conspiracy allows the audience to have a heightened awareness of the actions of one through the other. In both, the strong, honorable patriarch is undone by the ingratitude of at least one of his children. Both patriarchs seem to have contributed slightly to the misdeeds of their children. Gloucester directly separates his sons as legitimate and illegitimate and mentions it frequently. He also notes that 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 he sent Edmund away, likely because of his illegitimacy for a long period of time, for a long period of time, and plans to do so again. Stripped of property and title, one is less surprised by Edmund's move to undo his destiny. However, Shakespeare creates in the characters of Edgar and Gloucester hearts which seem honorable and trusting, making Edmund's plot to betray them more disgusting. Note that Gloucester immediately believes the letter which Edmund shows him, not at once questioning Edmund's honesty, although it would be doubtful that Gloucester had any previous reason to suspect or distrust Edgar. But remember, we must also keep in mind that an attempt to make a sense out of every encounter and character intention is not the purpose of the play. Instead, we must explore the character flaws and relationship developments as they are entwined within the parable Shakespeare is constructing and expanding. The parable's breadth is exaggerated and amplified by the doubling of themes in the plot and subplot. The demise of the father's position through betrayal by his own children was considered to be one of the cruelest, harshest offenses imaginable. The reflection of plot for which the seeds are planted in Act 1 magnifies the horrors of the tragedy. In this manner, blindness is one of the main symbolic and physical vehicles through which Shakespeare describes the horrors of ingratitude, insincerity, and hypocrisy. Dear students, this way, I have concluded my lecture. I have completed my lecture. It is over. My lecture is over, dear students. See you next time.